Welcome back to the Morbid Moonlight 31 Days of Felissa Rose. My name is Alex and we are here looking at the movies that feature, to any extent, a performance from the amazing genre icon that is Felissa Rose, and today, pretty much up to the minute, we're tucking into a film that came out about a month ago, and that film is Nigel Hartwell's The Demented. Well, what can I say about The Demented? Let's try this. This retro 1980s style horror movie was a breath of fresh air. It has an original story about sex trafficking in the dark web and the horrifying reality that women go missing every day in this world. The introduction to the killer is great, and I can see Chainsaw Chuck becoming the next Freddy. The film is clearly made on a low budget, but still has great production value. Now those aren't my words, they're a review that I have taken from the pages of the self-proclaimed world's #1 horror magazine, Scream, that I sometimes pick up before remembering why I don't ever bother reading that magazine anymore. The dude that wrote the review's name is Bill Lucas, and I'm not going to be slagging off Billy Boy here, even though, lest we forget, this isn't just some loony like me on the internet sharing their thoughts to anyone stupid enough to listen, but this is a guy that's actually been paid to write this review. But let me just say that I absolutely disagree with every single word that he has said. He gives the film an overall rating of 4 skulls out of a possible 5, and let me just say that, personally, I would struggle to give The Demented a score of 4 skulls out of 100, because it is fucking atrocious. Let's just do this very quickly. First of all, mate, it's not a retro 80s horror film. There's a bit of fake video noise at the very start of it that's meant to make it look like we're watching a VHS, and the opening credits are in neon. That is not a fucking retro 80s horror film. That's just the flimsiest bone to throw to 80s horror nerds to get them to say shit like that. It owes nothing whatsoever to the 80s, there is no film ever made in the 80s that ever looked or sounded anything like this travesty, and there is zero effort made to make it seem like it's an 80s film. Not that that's necessarily a good thing, because personally I think that there's too much blind kind of 80s nostalgia about in horrors these days, of people making 80s throwbacks who don't really study their source material, but instead rely on this vague kind of race memory of loud cliches like big hair, neon and drum machine synth soundtracks. To be honest, artistically, as somebody that loves the actual 80s, or at least I love a large chunk of them, I'd rather see films made these days that didn't hark back to old stuff, just because copying something is, at the end of the day, fairly pointless, and I'd rather see filmmakers doing their own thing. I'd say that you could call Demented retro if you're thinking nostalgically back to the cheapest, tackiest, straight-to-DVD, borderline porno horror films that you got in probably about 2003. Retro 80s horror vibe, that is just a complete out-and-out lie. Next up, breath of fresh air? You are joking. This has got to be one of the most tired, ugly, claustrophobic films that I have seen in years. Half of it's filmed in really dingy, tacky, tight little rooms, and the rest of it is filmed either outside without sound with a voiceover dubbed on in post-production, or else filmed as a head and shoulders close-up against a green screen background with some awful background digitally added. Short of one of the later Avengers films or the Doctor Who story Underworld, I have never seen so much shitty green screen in my life. I don't know why they relied on this approach to shooting dialogue scenes so much, because not only is it not much of a shortcut, I'm sure keying in backgrounds is more trouble than just actually shooting a close-up of somebody in a real space, but it never once looks remotely convincing. That means that we're watching something that, on a technical level of just believing we're watching even bad actors speaking in a real place, it's almost impossible to accept. A film about sex trafficking and the horrors that women go through? Well, it's a film about 50 minutes of long protracted scenes of our masked killer filming himself lightly torturing and molesting women tied to his bed whilst muttering and joking away to himself. It's not scary, it's not intense, it certainly does not reflect the realities of sex trafficking by any means. It's just like something from a really awful horror film shot in these long splodges of inert nastiness that just sit there like a wet sponge, whilst our killer, hilariously named Chainsaw Chuck, just because this is such a serious and meaningful film about a really terrible real-world problem, remember, rambles away to himself like somebody doing a bad improv routine to himself. By the way, to fuck with having some imbecile fake rape you as an actress, I'd have trouble just having to be tied down to listen to the shit that he comes out with, and the scenes that are just totally inert, totally lifeless, and really unpleasant, that total sweet spot of being sadistic and leery in concept, and totally incompetent in execution. I hate watching any scenes of non-consensual sexual sadism of any kind, but badly filmed stuff with shitty actors somehow feels even worse, because it means even more people are made to suffer. You don't even succeed in getting the reaction from your audience because it's all too badly filmed, and you make your performers suffer. and let's just do this next one, okay? I can see Chainsaw Chuck becoming the next Freddy. I can only guess that we're talking about a different Freddy here, not Mr. Freddy Krueger, because that's got to be one of the most fucking insane things that anybody has ever said in any published review of any film. Look, I love enthusiasm. I love anything that can make people get enthusiastic as long as it is genuine. But hyperbole about something this tacky and ugly just comes across as cynical and empty and completely devalues any point that you're trying to make. I hate slagging off really bad films genuinely because it's mean and it's petty and because there's no evidence that I could ever make a film as good as The Demented myself. Where I draw the line isn't at cheapness. Fuck knows, I've given the thumbs up to many Felissa Rose films that are on the very cheap side, and I love sticking up for scrappy, passionate little low-budget films that are trying their best. What I draw the line at, pure and simple, is films that are coming from a bad place. Now, The Demented opens by paying lip service to the plight of victims of sex trafficking, and that's a really horrible way to start your film because it's such a terrible thing to happen, and you don't need a clueless fuckwit like me to tell you that. Problem is, no matter what it says, this is not a film with any tact or taste when it comes to portraying the plight of its female characters, and the level of nudity and sleaze on display make it 100% clear that this is just a piece of tacky exploitation, not a film with any point to it. It's just your basic tied up and tortured film. Actually, it's worse than that because it's a tied up and raped film, and there's no fucking way on earth that there's ever a need for any more of those, because they're all just vile and disgusting, to be honest. Sorry to get puritanical, but the minute you put either nudity or lengthy scenes of sexual humiliation into any film, you've just got to step back and ask yourself, do I really need to fucking make this film? Do I have the moral responsibility to be making this film and to be asking my actors to perform these scenes that are obviously going to be grueling for them, let alone for the viewers? Because I would seriously argue the case that you don't. Nobody's going to come away from this feeling better about themselves or enlightened or even righteously angry. You're just going to be depressed and annoyed that you wasted your time and your money. I mean, fair enough, it's ultra low budget, fine. I can look past every single technical shortcoming here, and believe me, almost every minute of The Demented screen time is flawed in some way or another. It's got bad sound, bad acting, awful lighting, atrocious non-dialogue of the vague mumbling kind, no plot, no pace, no story, no characters, but once you get past all the shortcomings, you ask yourself, what story was this film trying to tell? And the answer is, it's a film about a guy filming himself raping and killing women, then selling the footage to a dude that distributes snuff films. And that's not a story that we need to ever see again, because it's sleazy and nasty, as well as being pointless and old as fuck. We get it, okay? Rape is bad, sex trafficking is bad, snuff movies are bad. We do not need to see another film about this shit. I love horror films. This isn't a horror film, it's just cheap, semi-porno sleaze that any horror fan should stay away from because it's shit like this that's ruining horror for the rest of us. I love watching as many new horror films as I can, but what I cannot stand is watching fucking tackily made, leery non-films that feel like flimsy home movies made by sex criminals. I will respect and give a chance to any horror film that doesn't feature rape or sexual humiliation of any kind, just because I think filmmaking is a truly amazing way of communicating ideas and stories to the world. What we don't need is shit like this that's the equivalent of watching someone filming themselves on their iPhone jerking off for about 90 minutes. It's not art, it's not storytelling, it's not somebody trying their best to make something that they've been dreaming about. It's just an excuse for a bunch of weirdos to film something that they shouldn't have ever gotten funding for, to be honest. Although I suspect it was the whole idea that this film was about the real and harrowing world of sex trafficking that got them the thumbs up from people that never saw the script. I mean, this is truly fucking shameful, mate. It's not cynical or lazy or shoddy. It's actually just truly, monumentally shameful on every single fucking level. And I feel sorry for Felissa Rose being involved with this film, especially as it's her picture that's slapped right on the front of the poster. I mean, they know what they need to do to sell films, don't they? The poster, I admit though, is actually quite good. It's a Felissa factor of 2 out of 10 for this one though, and I suspect, seeing how badly green-screened all of her scenes are, that she never even shared any camera time with any of these actors, which is just as well. It's sad, it's really, really sad, but I just can find nothing in my heart that says I enjoyed any single part of The Demented in the slightest. The only dilemma I've got is this well and truly the worst ever film that Felissa Rose has ever had anything to do with? Previous contenders included Ugly Sweater Party and Slaughter Party, which are really obnoxious, tacky, trauma-style comedies, one legit, one in the style of, whilst both Within These Walls and Extremity covered similar ground in that they were both full of horribly sexualised nastiness, although I think that Within These Walls, to be fair, actually had the decency to make sure that all of its rape scenes were horrible, and that there wasn't any gratuitous nudity or leering, which is at least morally responsible, but still kind of tough and dispiriting to watch. Within These Walls was also probably the cheapest thing that Felissa Rose has ever been in, and it was still miles more professional than this film. You know what, if you sat me down and forced me to, I think I'd rather watch Ugly Sweater Party than The Demented again. It really is, I'm sorry to say, by far the worst film ever to use Felissa Rose's name, and maybe, just out of over 100 films that I've seen in the year 2021, one of the very worst things that I've ever seen, which means that I'm going to throw it under the bus with an outstanding rating of a 0.5 out of 10. There's nothing good that I've got to say about The Demented, I'm afraid.